There's a lot of bad real estate advice out there, especially in the mainstream media headlines. Welcome to RE Radar. I'm your host and local realtor, Nathan Mathisen, and today we're going to be busting the top myths that I hear from Seattle buyers and sellers all the time. Some of these misconceptions, they could end up costing you thousands of dollars if you believe them. So let's set the record straight. All right, we have to start here, and this is hands down the biggest misconception in real estate. You do not need 20% down to buy a home. You simply don't need it. And here's the quick version of this, as I have touched on this topic before on RE Radar. But essentially, with a conventional loan, you can buy a home with as little as 3% down. FHA loan, 3.5% down. A VA loan, 0% down. Yep, 0%. Waiting to save 20%, that could actually cost you more if home prices rise while you wait. Now, the trade-off with putting down less than 20% is it usually will mean a private mortgage insurance or PMI. But here's the kicker with that. You often can buy out of that upfront or roll it right into your loan, or you could always just keep it until you hit that 20% equity and then it can disappear. So, myth busted. You don't need 20% down to buy a home. All right, let's jump into the next myth now. Spring is the only good time to sell. Well, spring is busy, but it's definitely not the only time to sell. Some of the strongest results for sellers can actually happen in the late summer or early winter. Why is that? Well, inventory tends to be lower then, and the serious buyers, though, are still out there looking. Now, here's the catch to that. Your home needs to actually be in good condition or at least in a desirable area to still be able to sell quickly in the winter or late summer. Those caveats are key, as if they're in place, listing that home in the late summer or early winter could actually be an advantage to you, as there will be fewer homes out there on the market, so your property might stand out more and buyers could notice it more likely. But at the end of the day, really the most important factor is simple. Sell when it makes sense for you. Every month has its pros and cons, sure, but people usually are moving for life reasons. A job change, a new relationship, growing their family. They're not planning those moves around the seasons. So don't feel pressured to just sell your home in spring because that's when everyone says it's the best time to sell. That's what you always read on mainstream media headlines, sell your home in spring. And yes, spring, especially May, is often the peak of the market in terms of how many homes are out there for sale. So it's easy to see why people assume that selling in spring must be the best option. It's what everyone does. But here's the thing, remember this, if your home is a little bit of a quirky one or doesn't photograph perfectly, spring might actually work against you. With so many other listings out there, your home could get lost in that crowd while buyers are focusing on properties that instantly caught their eye and drew them in versus yours that was a little quirky. So really, when's the best time to sell? It's whenever you're ready, not whenever the calendar says it's supposed to be the peak real estate season. Alrighty, next myth we got is that all cash buyers will always win. Cash is strong. There's no doubt about that. I can't lie there, but it's not unbeatable. A lot of people think that if you're up against a cash offer, there's no point in trying, which that's just not true. See, there are other terms in an offer that can make a seller lean towards a financed offer over an all cash offer. Let me give you a couple quick examples. Let's say there are two offers at the exact same price. The cash buyer still wants to keep the inspection contingency though. Meanwhile, that financed buyer, he's waiving inspection and sewer scope. From a seller's perspective, that inspection contingency means the cash buyer has an easier way to walk out of the deal if the inspector finds anything. Even if you think that home of yours is in great shape, an inspector can always point out and will always point out these little small minute details, but that could give the buyer cold feet. Now, sure, a financed offer might come with the financing contingency, but if the buyer is solidly pre-approved, there's still some safety in there for the seller. Yes, things can always happen. People lose jobs. Life throws curveballs. But in plenty of situations, the security of waived contingencies outweighs the uncertainty of that inspection risk. And there are other terms that could matter for the seller as well. One of the big ones is closing time. Sometimes sellers don't actually want the fastest of close times. They want the close that lines up with their life and what they're doing. If a cash buyer is saying they got to close in 14 days, but the seller isn't going to be ready to move for another month or two, a financed offer that gives them 30 or maybe they want 45 days might actually be more attractive than that cash offer that has the quicker close. The point is, don't just count yourself out because you're financing. Finance buyers win all the time with better price, better terms, or with flexibility, like offering the seller a rent back. Sellers don't always pick the fastest or cleanest offer. Sometimes they pick the one that makes their move easier, smoother, or more profitable in their case. Every seller can be different. So if you're nervous about competing with cash, remember this: you've still got options, and the only way to find out if the seller will take your offer is to actually make an offer. Now, the next myth, on the surface, it kind of makes sense. You might even hear it and think, yeah, that's actually a pretty smart move. But in practice, it usually backfires. And that's the myth that overpricing leaves room to negotiate. Here's how people think about it: let's price the home high, and we can always come down later. That way, we've got some wiggle room from what we really need to get. I get it. It sounds logical, but here's the reality: overpricing is one of the fastest ways to kill your listing's momentum. In Seattle, and really in most markets, your first 7 to 10 days on the market are critical. They are crucial. They are the most important week and a half. That's when all the motivated buyers, the ones who've been waiting for a home like yours, are going to see it pop up. They're going to see it in their search. And if you come out too high, those buyers will just keep scrolling right past it on to the next, thinking, overpriced, I'll wait for the price drop, or too expensive, I'm going to look for something lower priced. Because here's the problem: you get the most eyes on your home in that first week. That's when the backlog of buyers are all there. They all see it at once. And as the weeks go by, fewer and fewer new buyers trickle in for you. So instead of getting that surge of activity, you're left with stale interest on this overpriced home. And here's the flip side: if you price it right from the start, you actually can create negotiating power for yourself. Sounds a little backwards, but think about it like this: the right price is going to attract more buyers. More buyers mean more showings mean better odds of getting multiple offers. And when you've got multiple offers, that competition is what is going to drive that price up, sometimes higher than what you could have gotten if you started high in the first place. I've seen it here in Seattle all the time. Homes are going 50,000, 75,000, even 100,000 above list price in some cases. And it all happened because these agents and these sellers, they started at a number that pulled a lot of people into it. So instead of thinking, let's price high and come down, flip that mindset to thinking, price it right and wait for it to go up when the offers come in. With real estate, your strategy isn't to just sit and hope for one big perfect offer. You want to catch as many buyers as possible all at once. Now, let's talk about one of the riskiest myths out there, and that's that you should always waive inspections if you really want to win this home. Now, sure, waiving inspections can sometimes work. It can make your offer look stronger, and in a multiple offer situation, it might very likely be the thing that tips the scale in your favor. But here's the flip side: it could also leave you with a $30,000 repair bill before you even are able to move into that home. This is especially true if you're buying a home that was built before around the 1960s. And here's why: unless that sewer line has already been replaced, it's probably 65 plus years old. And back then, builders were using a concrete sewer line. Those typically have a lifespan of around 75 years. So if it hasn't been touched, you're right up against that end of life for your sewer line. And remember this about Seattle: it is full of older homes. We're talking about plenty of neighborhoods where you'll see homes built in the 40s, 30s, even the 1920s, where those original sewer lines could still be in place. If the seller hasn't already done a sewer scope and it's an older home, I would be very hesitant to go under contract without seeing that line for yourself. And the reason for that is the cost to fix it. It's really going to depend on if and where that damage is, and then how much of the line will need to be replaced or fixed. Sometimes you might get lucky and it might just be a $10,000 repair. But I've also seen situations where it's over $50,000 for the new sewer line. That's not the kind of surprise you want right after closing. So sewer scopes are huge, but they're not the only inspection that matters. Simply a general home inspection is also going to be important. A good inspector is going to look over the overall condition of the home, not just the little stuff. They'll be checking the roof out. They'll give you a rough timeline on when it might need to be replaced. They'll be looking at the electrical, the plumbing, the foundation, basically all those major systems. These are the things you don't want to get stuck repairing right after you move in, as they could have a high repair bill. And look, I totally understand it. Waiving inspections can definitely help your offer stand out. I'm not going to kid around with that. That's true. But here's the real truth: it can also cost you huge sums of money once you close and discover all those issues for yourself that you couldn't possibly have seen just walking through the home for a half hour or an hour. That's why my advice is always don't skip the inspection, or at the very least, make sure there's a pre inspection that was done and was handled by an experienced, trusted inspector. It can be the difference between protecting yourself and stepping into a massive financial pit. Now, myth number 6, this is going to be a big one right now because everyone's watching the Fed, and it is the idea that you should always be waiting for the rates to drop before buying. At the start of January 2025, interest rates were sitting around 7%. Since then, they've slowly been drifting down into the 6.6, 6.5 range. So, yes, they've been coming down a little bit, but not in the dramatic way or the mainstream media way that a lot of folks are sitting on the sideline hoping for. Now, I'm not exactly sure when this episode will be released, as I'm recording it a little ahead of time. And the Fed, it seems likely, is to cut rates September 17th, I believe. How much they'll cut it, that's unknown at the point I'm recording it. This will be the first rate cut of 2025. And it seems like that might be what everyone is waiting for. They're waiting to hear the Fed cutting rates. The thought from the public is, because of mainstream media, it seems that right when the Fed cuts rate, mortgage rates will follow suit. But here's the reality. Just because the Fed cut their rate doesn't mean mortgage rates automatically follow. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. The connection isn't as direct as most people think. Now, the average buyer doesn't really seem to know that. So they're sitting tight, waiting for that big Fed announcement. And what happens when it finally does come? A ton of buyers are going to be looking for that mortgage rate to drop and come back into the market, flooding in here. And unless a big wave of new listings also shows up at the same time, sellers are going to have the upper hand again, and it's going to go in the seller's direction, with homes starting to sell way above list price and buyers having to use aggressive strategies just to compete. Now, the alternative to this is, if you can afford to buy and get into a home today, it actually could make more sense to you to buy now. Get in the door and start building equity. And then if rates do drop significantly within the next year or two, you can refinance and bring that monthly payment down. That way, you're not stuck in the waiting game, and you've locked in the house that you really love, and you've got the option to lower your rate later if mortgage rates do drop. And think about this. If you were one of those people waiting for a big rate drop back in 2023, well, you would still be waiting today. And in the meantime, Seattle home prices, well, they have continued to climb, even with rates at levels of most buyers or the average buyer being uncomfortable. The market has appreciated. So waiting for that perfect interest rate often costs you more in the long run, because while you're waiting, prices keep going up. So in closing here, just the Seattle market, it changes every single year, sometimes every single season. But these myths have been hanging around for decades. And honestly, they are costing people real money. That's why I do RE Radar. If you hear something, maybe from a neighbor, your uncle at Thanksgiving, or even another agent, and you're not sure if it's actually true, feel free to reach out to me before you make a move, and I'll give you the real answer, even if it's not the one you were hoping for, because that is how you make smart decisions in real estate, being informed and educated. Now, that does it for today's episode. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching. Until next time, have a good one. Peace.